Hey dudes, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. In today's video we are doing a Bible study and we are going to be looking at Daniel and the Lion's Den, which you can find in Daniel chapter 6. So have a little read over this for yourselves now if you want to, otherwise I'm just going to go straight into a summary. But I do encourage you to read it because you might pick out things in this passage which I don't mention in this video, and that's a really cool way for God to speak to you personally. Also, then you can make sure that what I'm saying is in line with the Bible, which is really important when you're listening to people teaching about it. And also, it's not very long. So to summarise, the king at the time is King Darius, and he appoints 120 satraps, which is like another word for governors. And there were 3 chief ministers above all of those, and one of those people was Daniel. And Daniel was really liked by King Darius. Daniel was really good at his job. He was a very good, blameless sort of person, and so King Darius actually planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And the other chief ministers and the satraps really didn't like Daniel for that reason, so they tried to find reasons that they could charge him and put him away in prison, but they couldn't find him, again because he's someone who was so blameless. They couldn't find any reason to charge him with anything. So what they did was they went to the king and they said, let's make a special rule that for 30 days no one can pray to any god, only you. And they really made sure that King Darius made absolutely no exceptions to this rule. This was applied to every single person in the kingdom, and King Darius agreed. However, Daniel was really faithful to God and he continued to pray 3 times a day as usual. And so when this got reported back to the king did everything he could to try and save Daniel and make sure Daniel wouldn't get held accountable to this rule. But the chief ministers and satraps reminded him, hey, you made this rule, you made no exceptions, you have to send him away, you have to put him in prison. So the king had no choice but to seal Daniel in a lion's den as punishment, even though it was really distressing for King Darius to do that. So King Darius knew that it was out of his control and he just had to encourage Daniel to put hope in God, that God would save him. So King Darius couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, and in the morning time he ran back to the den, he called through the huge stone that was sealing it, Daniel, are you in there, are you alive? And Daniel replied, yes, God saved me, God sent an angel, he shut the mouths of the lions and I survived. And then Daniel was set free. And as much as I would love to cut the story there, it does actually continue to say that the satraps and the chief ministers, including their wives and children, then got thrown into the lion's den and got devoured before they even hit the floor. Which in a way is a very sad thing. But in another way, it also just shows us the importance of us putting our faith in God. So let's dive into a little bit more detail and see what we can learn and apply from this. So I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this story in the sense that for Daniel, things seemed to be going really well, and then just very quickly things just went so downhill for him in a way that was largely out of his control. And that's what happened to Daniel. Daniel had such favour from the king, and then very quickly, through circumstances and rules that were outside of his control, because he chose to stick to God and have faith in God and continue to give thanks and praise to God, that ended him up in the lion's den, but he still chose to do it. And so for us, when we're in situations where we've gone from cloud 9 to what feels like 6 feet under, are we gonna remain faithful to God or are we not? So often in our lives when we go through suffering, we want God to just take away the suffering completely for us. That is our ideal image of being saved from a situation, is that God just doesn't let us go through it in the first place. Whereas in this story, yes, Daniel was saved, but he still went in the lion's den. That stone still got sealed behind him. And so when we're in situations like Daniel and the door is sealed behind us and we're just faced with our worst fears or what seems like the worst situation, something absolutely terrifying and awful, some terrible suffering, it can feel like God's abandoned us and why on earth has he let me go through this? This is awful. But there's another story in the Bible about God healing a blind man, and what's really always helped me about that story and any kind of suffering I go through is that Jesus says that he heals the blind man so that the glory of God may be displayed in him. So yes, God could have protected Daniel in the sense that no one ever caught him praying those 3 times a day throughout those 30 days. But by letting him go into that tomb, the door sealed behind, that is a sign to everyone that God can intervene when the situation seems the most awful. That is a sign of God's true power in a situation to save us from when it just seems absolutely impossible. And it's a great test for Daniel to really show that he has so much faith in God. And it's interesting because the Bible doesn't really tell us how Daniel was feeling about this. We actually don't get a lot of this from his point of view, which would be a very interesting question for heaven one day maybe. I guess we can only wonder how we would react if we were in his position, obviously not knowing that God was going to save us and send an angel. The point is that sometimes God allows these bad things to happen to us. He doesn't necessarily create the bad things like a lot of people believe. He allows them to happen so that his glory may be displayed to many people. He knew that by letting Daniel go into the den and face those fears, so many people would see God's power to save those who are faithful to him and those who trust him. So the original decree to all the people is that they can only pray to the king for the month. But the new decree, once Daniel has come out of the den completely unwounded, is this. Verse 26. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And this word fear at the beginning isn't the kind of fear that should make you feel unsafe around God. It's the kind of fear that means that you acknowledge God's authority and therefore you give him respect. So the word fear is a really good word for us to help keep us humble before God so that we don't get too big for our boots. Yes, God will save us. Yes, God is all powerful. Yes, he is faithful to us. But Daniel got that because of his faith in God, because he chose to do what was right by God and put his faith in God above anything else. So as we can see from the story, it is a huge story about when we put our faith in God, how God saves us through that, how he is faithful to us in the darkest situations which just seem absolutely impossible. God is there for us and he turns all of these bad situations for good. So if this story doesn't give you reassurance of God's faithfulness through your sufferings, you need to read it again. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed doing this Bible study with me. I really love revisiting the story because honestly I haven't revisited it since I was like a child growing up in church, so that's really, really nice. And if it's your first time hearing this story, I hope you really enjoyed it as well, because it's so fantastic and there are so many more like this. So if there are any particular Bible stories that you know of that you would like me to do a study video with, then do let me know in the comments down below and I'll be sure to get that done for you. And in the meantime, don't forget to like this video if you liked it, comment your comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in another video.